Our scripture for today is found in Deuteronomy 5, verse 16. Honor thy father and thy mother, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that thy days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with thee, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word.
Good morning and happy Sabbath, everyone. I have something to tell you. Don't be surprised that we are going to have a surprise quiz today. Are you ready? There's only one question. Okay. It is a commandment of God. It is a commandment with a promise. And this is the fifth commandment in the 10 great commandments of God. Do you know the answer? Can you say it in one go? 1, 2, 3. Okay. It's good to know that we are all on the same page, because when I was searching the internet, I was looking for the fifth commandment. It's surprising that sometimes it shows, thou shalt not kill. And I realized, I was not a Seventh-day Adventist before, and in my previous religion, this is the fourth commandment. But we know that this is the fifth commandment, and we know that this is to honor our father and our mother. Now, today, our small children actually have their worship outside. But this sermon is actually not for small children. This sermon is for our adults. Can we switch to HDMI? Our topic today is the fifth commandment, but we are going to look at it from a viewpoint that few of us are looking at it. Most of the time we say the fifth commandment is for the small children. But today, we are going to approach it from an angle. What does it mean to obey this commandment as adults? And as far as I can see, most of us here are adults. So we have to ask the question, does the commandment stop applying the day we move out or we get married? Does it expire when our parents die and when they prove themselves unworthy of our respect? Now I'm starting to touch some sensitive bones here. Does it apply to those who have been abandoned or abused? Does our adherence to this commandment change as we grow older or become independent? These are the questions that we need to ask and answer if we want to honor God by honoring His commandments. Maybe our question is more urgent. Maybe the question that we need to ask is, do I need to support my parents now? Do I need to help them financially? Now, we are going to do this in a two-part sermon. Today is part 1. Next week is part 2. And I hope, once you hear today's sermon, that you would still be here next week. Right? Because I want this sermon to be first biblical. I want to take the Bible as the ultimate source of truth. And to take the Bible as something that will bind our conscience and will demand obedience from us. I also want this sermon to be practical. I want this sermon to answer real questions in real ways for real life. I don't want this to remain as just theories. I want this to be practical. And I want this to be multicultural. If you look around here in this room, you can see that we come from different cultures, different backgrounds. So I want to discuss things that can be applied regardless of whether you come from Asia or from Africa or from America. And last, I want this to be convicting. It is my prayer that this sermon at least will change, if not alter the way we treat our parents and then change the way we're doing things. I mean, it is not yet too late. You will say, I'm already 60 years old, 70 years old, but if your parents are still alive, you can still do something. And even if your parents are already dead, I think this commandment is still applicable to us. Now, let's go to our key verse here. Our key verse is Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16. And you are aware that the Ten Commandments, you can find it in two places in the Bible, one in Exodus 20 and one in Deuteronomy chapter 5. We'll be using Deuteronomy 5, which says, honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You can easily see from this commandment that it has a promise attached to it. But we are not going to obey this commandment because of the promises that are attached to it. But we can cite 3 reasons to know and obey this commandment. First, we are all children. Who among you here is not a child of somebody? All of us are children, offspring of 2 parents, right? If anyone here is not an offspring of 2 parents, then this sermon is not for you. Probably in all human beings, the only exception is Adam and Eve, right? And perhaps Jesus, because, as you know, is of virgin birth. But we are all children. Perhaps some of us have known both of our parents from the beginning, and that's probably the usual. But some of us probably only knew our parents, one of our parents. Some of us are probably just adopted, and probably we don't know our real parents. And the way things are going on, especially from the country where I come from, a lot of parents are going abroad, leaving their children in their country. Some of the children probably grew up not knowing who their parents are. But this commandment is telling us that we are all children. So this commandment is applicable to all of us. Second, this commandment comes with a promise. Who among you don't want to receive blessings from God? God promised us that if you obey your parents, there will be blessings that will come your way. And it is wise and good to obey the commandments so we can enjoy the promised blessings. We will look more of what this blessing entails and what is the opposite side if it is not blessing. You will see that most of the times the commandment of God comes with blessings, and if you disobey, the curses that comes with it. Third reason, God gives this commandment a special honor. You know the 10 Commandments, right? Most of the time we imagine it written in 2 tablets of stones. We say that the first tablet is the 4 commandments that deals with God, and the next table are the commandments that deals with our fellow human being. And this is the 5th commandment. This is kind of a bridge between the commandments to honor God and the commandments that deals with our fellow human beings. As if it is saying, our parents are God's representative to us. Do you know that most children, from the beginning, they don't have a concept of who God is? How they will learn who God is? Most of the times, it's through their parents. If their parents are loving, supportive, helpful, they will picture God as loving, helpful, and supportive. But if their parents are not loving, not supportive of them, then they would think, is that God, how God is? So let's be careful that this commandment is actually in the middle of these 10 commandments, because it is telling us it's kind of a bridge between the commandments to deal with God and to deal with our human beings. Now, just a word of warning. This is human nature, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if we hear a commandment, the first thing that comes into our mind is the exceptions, right? Some of us may say, but you don't know my parents. Usually the people who would say this is, you don't know my parents. They are really mean parents. You won't like to stay in our house just if you know my parents. Some of us would say, but I don't know my parents. And this may be the case if you grew up not your parents being an absentee parent. Or probably they died already before you have reached the age that you know them. So you may say, I don't know my parents. How can I honor them? You may say, my parents disowned me. You may have very contentious relationship with your parents up to the point that your parents told you, you are no longer my child. Go out. Right? Or you may say, but my parents were abusive. But let me tell you this. Before we deal with exceptions, and we are going to talk about exceptions, we need to understand first the principle. We have to understand the general rule first before we look for the exception clause. Did you get me? I pray that you will not close your ears and your heart, saying, this commandment is not for me. Because my parents were abusive, because my parents are not honorable parents, and therefore this commandment is not for me. Please, just don't close your ears right now. Because if you look at the commandment, there is no if attached to the commandment. It just tells us, honor your father and your mother. There are no ifs and there are no buts. So please, I am not going to downplay this kind of experiences. I know there are very difficult, hard experiences that some of us have experienced with our parents. I am not downplaying them. But what I'm saying is, we are going to deal with these exceptions. Part 2 of this sermon. But let us first learn the principle of the Fifth Commandment. Right? So far, so good? Are you ready for this? I know that some of us would probably feel hurt. And that is not my intention today. My intention is for us to understand that we are all children and God is commanding us to honor our parents. So let's go. This is going to be the sermon outline, right? We will talk about honor and obedience. Why? Because these two words are actually the main thing that God, the Bible, is telling us how to obey this commandment. We are going to talk about the role of culture. As you can see, TIC, we are made up of different people from different parts of the globe. There was a time that when we were doing a World Sabbath, we counted how many cultures are represented in our church. There was actually 27. 27 countries represented at TIC. So we will talk about the role of culture. And then in part 2, we are going to talk about the practical ways. Practical ways how you can honor your father and your mother. And then we're going to talk about the hard cases. What are the hard cases? Those that we think are exceptions to this commandment. Right? So please bear with me. Let's look back at our main verse. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you. You can see that there's a promise here. But this commandment was given more than 2,000 years ago, probably more than 3,000 years ago. How is this applicable to me? We started with this verse, but we are going to springboard to other verses in the Bible. We're going to look at Exodus, Deuteronomy, to see how God intended this commandment to be obeyed by his people. And then we will go to the New Testament. We will look at the life of Jesus to see how Jesus obeyed this commandment. And we will look at the writings of Paul to see how Paul applied this to more contemporary people, right? So let's look at Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 to 3. This is Paul writing to the Christians in Ephesians. And this is what he said: "Children, obey your parents in the Lord. For this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise." And what is the promise? That it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Imagine you're one of the Christians in Ephesus, or imagine Paul is writing to TIC Christians, and he is telling you, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." How do we understand this? Now, a lot of people that I talk to, when I mention to them, "Look, Paul is telling us, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Do you know what they are emphasizing? They emphasize more the word "in the Lord." Why is that? Because they automatically think about the exception clause. They don't think about the general rule. The first thing that comes into their mind is exception. But I don't think that is the way we should approach this. We should look for the general rule and then talk about the exceptions. Now, let's look at this verse and see reasons why children should honor their parents. Now, I would like to give you a heads up here that I am interchanging the word honor and obey. Have you noticed that? We will talk about what is the difference between obey and honor. But let's first look at why children should honor their parents. First, nature demands it. What did Paul say? "Children, obey your parents, for this is right." Paul is saying God created us in this structure that you will have parents and you are expected to honor your parents. This is what we call as evident truth. That is how things are. So Paul is just saying, do this because this is right. Another reason why we should honor our parents is because God's law demands it. Paul quoted the Fifth Commandment. Paul said, "This is the commandment with a promise. Honor your father and your mother." Do you want to obey the law of God? Then it is obvious we should honor our parents. The third reason, the gospel demands it. Now, you can have different interpretation of what Paul means when he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord." Some would say, "Oh, you should only obey parents if they are in the Lord." Right? But it can also mean that children, obey your parents as if you are in the Lord. Meaning, you have understood the gospel and you are obeying your parents because you understood the gospel. And when we look at how we will honor our parents, there is no way we can honor our parents without understanding the gospel. If you understand what God did for us, then you will have no reason to make any exceptions about this commandment. Have I started making you feel uncomfortable? No, not yet? Okay. Let's continue. Question: to obey or not to obey? We know in this commandment we have promises, but we also have the consequences if you don't obey. What are the promises? Obey and receive God's blessing. What's the promises? That it may be well with you. In modern word, that we will have good life. Do you agree with that? Okay? That you may live long on the earth, a long life. Now, let's have a background of this blessing. When God gave this commandment to the Israelites, it was at the time that God is about to give them the promised land, right? And if you look at the Old Testament, a very obvious sign that God's favor is with the people is if they were living in the promised land. Did you get that? When the Israelite nation were living on the promised land, that's a sign that God's favor was with them. And if they are living long in that land. Have you noticed that God exiled his people? God exiled his people from the promised land into a foreign land. What's the reason for that? Because he was displeased with them, right? Because they were not obeying his commandments. So this is the background of this blessing. This is not to tell us that God is promising you, if you obey your parents, I promise you, you will have at least 80 birthdays. No, this is not what God is telling us. And God is also not telling us that if you disobey, that if you have a short life, that means that you dishonor your parents. No. But God is just saying that generally, this is how life will be. Honor your parents, and the natural consequence of that is that you will have a good life. Disobey and forfeit God's blessing. What will it be? A miserable life? A short life? Now, let me expound about this miserable life and short life. Right? I told you that we are going to go to Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy to find out how serious God is about this commandment. And you'll be surprised what it means if a child, a son who strikes his father or his mother, what will happen to him? It says, and he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Wow. What did this son do? He strikes his father or his mother. The punishment is death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Now, this is not only talking about physical violence, it's just cursing. Why are we not doing this now? Can you imagine if we apply this civil law in our society now? How many children will be dead? Or probably will not be here. But this just shows us how serious God was with this commandment with the nation of Israel. Let's look at Deuteronomy. If a man has a stubborn and religious son and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them, what will they do? Then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders at the city gates. Parents will take hold of that son and will bring the son in the city gates. For what? And they shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, and he will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. What will happen after that? Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. You probably have noticed that the punishment for disobeying the Fifth Commandment is the same as punishment for killing, for murdering people. Have you already got the gravity, the seriousness of disobeying this commandment? Let's look at Proverbs. Probably you'd say, oh, Leviticus, Exodus, that's more civil law. But let's look at Proverbs 19, verse 26. He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach. Now, this is just lighter. But look at this. The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Can you imagine this? And we are just talking about the eye that mocks his father. Now, obviously, when God gives a commandment and say, obey my commandments and you will have blessings. But if you disobey, you are forfeiting my blessings. and instead, these curses will come. This is the natural result of disobeying God's commandment. Now, I am intentionally making this very serious because what I feel is in our society now, some of us are already expecting that our child will undergo a natural progression. And this is what psychologists are telling us, right? You will have a baby, and then you will have a toddler, and then you will have a youngster, and then you will have a teenager. And we say when our child becomes a teenager, it is just natural for them to be rebellious. Isn't that what psychologists are telling us? And that's what kind of we are expecting. That when our children are rebellious, we're saying, oh, this is just natural. Looking at the verses that we look at, would you say that God is telling us that a rebellious child is natural? No. God is expecting child to honor his father and his mother. Our minds got so twisted by our society that it is very light for now, today, and kind of we expect our children to be rebellious. And then we say, oh, it will pass. What if it will not pass? What if they started to become rebellious 10, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old, and then they're already 20 years old, 25 years old, and they're still rebellious? What now? Would you say, oh, I made a mistake? What now? What happens? Probably we have to look closer how we would have to obey this commandment, right? So far we discussed why we need to obey this commandment, but we have not discussed how. The details of how, we will discuss it in part 2, right? But we will just talk about high-level principles of how we can do this so that we will be set in the right direction. Honor and obedience. Have you noticed that in the commandment, the requirement is to honor your father and your mother? It is not to obey your father and your mother. Have you noticed that? It's both in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. So we have to ask this question. Is obedience to parents permanent or is it temporary? Yeah, I mean, I prepare if you will answer silently or you can voice it out, but you can expect your seatmate to look at you and say, what? Is that how you believe this is to be? Does honor always require obedience? If I want to honor my parents, do I need to continue obeying them throughout my life? Now, I can hear some of you saying yes, maybe some of you thinking inside no, but you don't want to voice it loud because you are probably ashamed of saying, oh, they may think that I am not agreeing with what the Bible is telling us. But in order to differentiate what honor and obedience is, we would need to understand the meaning of the word. What does it mean to obey? To follow the commands or guidance of, and I just took this from the dictionary, to conform or to comply with. And usually, this is from a person of authority. To follow the commands or guidance of, to conform or to comply with. Now, when children are young, honor most often takes the form of obedience. Now, why do I say that? If you look at the Bible, we know that the Ten Commandments is telling us, honor your parents, honor your father and your mother. But it is also clear in the Bible, if you look at how Proverbs, Paul applied it, obedience is a big part of it, right? So we cannot separate honor and obedience. But if we dig deeper, right, we'll find out that the word obedience is usually applied to younger children. When I say younger children, those children that are still under the authority of their parents. And when you look at the application of this commandment later in the Bible, the wordings has some change. Honor now takes the form of respect and provision. And you will see that in the verses that we are going to look at. But for young children, honor usually takes the form of obedience. Parents teach their children to obey and then expect that when they become independent, when they grow old, they will honor their parents the rest of their life. Do you see the difference there? You train your child to obey, and then you expect them the whole of their life they will honor you. Now, why is it very important that we teach our children obedience? Can you think of reasons why we need to teach our children obedience? Is it because it's just for us? Because we are their parents? At least in the school that I attended before in high school, we were taught in social studies, right, that the nucleus of the society is the family. If you have children who are obedient, you can expect that you will have citizens who will be obedient. Do you agree with me on that? If you have children who are obedient, you will not have problem having adults who are obedient, not only to your parents, but also to authorities, church authority, or government authority. So if you have obedient children, you can expect a society that will be ordered, that can be sustainable, right? But if you have rebellious, disobedient children, what kind of society are we expecting? We are going to expect chaotic society. Now, it is obedience to parents that trains children to be submissive to every other authority, including God Himself. This is how we train our children to be obedient to God. We train them to be obedient to us first. If you fail to do this as parents, then you are doing a disservice to your children. And again, I'm emphasizing this sermon is not only for small children, but it is for adults. We have to think right now, am I honoring my parents up to this moment of time, right? But what does it mean to honor? How can you differentiate obedience and honor? Honor, biblically. The word honor refers to weight or significance. When you honor someone, that means you are giving value, weight to your relationship with them. You tell them, Daddy, Mommy, I value you. I honor you. Our relationship is very important for me. That is giving honor. To honor our parents, we are to attach great worth to them and great value to our relationship with them. And to honor our parents, we are to respect and revere them. Now, listen carefully, because this is important. To honor our parents, we are to respect and revere them, to speak well of them, and to treat them with kindness, gentleness, dignity, and esteem. Now, these are verbs. These are action words. So, honor is a small word that tells us this is an attitude that is accompanied by these actions. Actions that show respect, reverence, speaking well of them. Sometimes this saddens me to hear some people, even adults, talking bad things about their parents. Now, they may have reasons for doing that. Their parents probably may be bad parents. But that is not obeying the commandments of God. If you want to give honor to your parents, you have to speak well of them. But you may ask the question, what if I don't have anything to speak of them? What is the rule of thumb there? If you have nothing good to say, do not say anything. Right? Treat them with kindness, gentleness, dignity, and esteem. We will discuss the details of this in part 2, but just for now, remember, this is how we honor our parents. And this is probably a more practical aspect of it. We are to ensure they are cared for and even to make provisions for them when necessary. Now, what do I mean when I say cared for and make provisions for them? Mark 7, chapter 8 to 13, you will see here Jesus talking to some religious people. And these religious people were saying, oh, the money that I have now, they're actually for God, for church. They have a term for it. They call it korban, right? But what they're saying is, I don't need to support my parents with this money because this money is for God. How many of us have done that? Because we don't like our parents, we're saying this money is for the work of God, so I have nothing to give to my parents. But Mark chapter 7 is telling us that we should make provisions for our parents. How about 1 Timothy chapter 5? 1 Timothy chapter 5, if you start from verse 1 to verse 8, it is talking about helping the widows, right? And it is in our Sabbath school lesson. The church needs to help the widow. But Paul is telling us some words that will give us some cue. They say, help the widows, the real widows. Is there such a thing as not real widows? But if you look at the verses corresponding to that, Paul was telling them, if this widow have families left, meaning if they have nephews, if they have nieces, if they have cousins, let them take care of these widows first. And in verse 8 it says, if any one of you will not take care of his immediate family, he is worse than an unbeliever. And this verse is also telling us about making return to our parents. What does it mean? Looks like for me the Bible is expecting us, children, adult children, to return something to our parents. What is that something? But you can see here that giving honor to our parents is taking different form. As a young child, it takes a form of obedience. As we grow older, it takes different types of form, which includes taking care of them and making provisions for them. Now, have you started thinking about your father and your mother? If they are still living, where are they now? Are they taken care of? I hope what we are discussing now will change something in our thinking. What is the basic requirement in the Fifth Commandment? The basic requirement is honor instead of obey. Why is that? I can think of at least two reasons, but there could be many. One is there comes a time when obeying parents is no longer appropriate. Now, a while ago, I heard some whispers from among you and say, should we obey our parents for the whole of our lives? Say, yes, yes. Does honor always mean that we should obey? Say, yes, yes. Can you think of a case, a time when obeying parents is no longer appropriate? In Genesis, right, chapter 2, it says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. What happens when that leaving happens? That is marriage, right? A man has his wife. So what now happens to his relationship with his parents in terms of obedience? For those of you who are married, you will probably think seriously about this. If you are married to a man, right, who still keeps on listening always to what his parents is telling him to do in your household, what would you do? If I hope it's not very audible. But can you understand what I'm trying to point here? There are times that your obedience to your parents, at least the degree of your obedience, is no longer the same as when you are a child under the authority of your parents. When you are already married, you have your own family. And the way you obey your parents is already of a different form, right? I'm not telling you to disregard your parents. No, that's not my point. My point is, when you have your own family, when you are no longer under the authority of your parents, right? The obedience is no longer the same degree as when you are under the roof. Now, I'm talking about obedience here. I'm not talking about honor, right? Now, what would be another case where obeying our parents may not be right? There may be also occasions when obedience is sinful, such as when parents command their children to sin. If you are reading the internet, social media, and the internet news, probably you have gone across some articles saying one parent was using her daughters to do pornography of the internet. Have you seen any articles similar to that? Or some parents using their children to trade drugs. Would it be a good case that obeying our parents is sinful? Yeah, right? If our parents is telling us to disobey God, or to disobey the government, which is not contrary to the Word of God, if your parent is telling you, go, get me some candies from the convenience store, and don't pay for it, are you supposed to obey your parents? No. These are two reasons why I would say the basic requirement of the commandment is not obey, but honor. Because there are cases that you don't have to obey your parents. But what about honor? Are there circumstances that you are allowed not to honor your parents? No. Obedience may have variation of degrees depending on whether you are under the authority of your parents or not, or whether they are asking you to do sin. So there are some limitation in obedience, but honor, there is no limitation to honor. When you were born, you have to start honoring your parents. And even when your parents are dead, you still need to honor your parents. Even when you are grown-up adults, you still need to honor your parents. There is no end to honoring your parents. That is why God is telling us, honor your father and your mother. Let's look at a perfect example, the life of Jesus, right? We should always look at Jesus to give us guidance. And I need to tell you this. If you want to obey your parents, to honor your parents, you have to learn of Jesus. If you want your children to honor you, you have to teach them of Jesus. If you fail to do that, then you will reap the consequences of this, right? Now, when Jesus was young, in Luke chapter 2, verse 51, it says, he went with them, right, in Jerusalem, and then he became submissive to them. That means Jesus was obeying them, submissive to them as a young child. But that didn't stop from being an obedient child. Remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross? His hands nailed? He was about to die. And what was on his mind? He was still thinking about his mother. in John chapter 19, verse 26 to 27, remember what he said to John? John, look after her. I'll be gone soon. Take care of her. And he told her mother, woman, this is now your son. Even up to the point of death, Jesus was thinking about how to make provisions for his earthly mother. Can we say the same thing for us? Are we thinking about our parents even when we are adults? And when we look at the life of Jesus, the Bible is telling us that Jesus is always obedient to his heavenly Father. So obedient that even up to the point of death on the cross. Now, this is perfect example of obedience and honor. Now, I felt that we won't be able to proceed more if we don't talk about culture. Because you would say, what about culture? Do we expect to honor our parents differently if you were born in one country or another? Right? Do you know how we honor our parents in the Philippines? Do you know how Japanese people honor their parents here in Japan or in the United States? Let's talk about two cultures here. There can be many, but I will distill it into two groups. One group values autonomy and independence as high virtues. Right? I was looking at the internet one time, and I was watching this YouTube. And this is how it unfolds. They asked Asian people. When I say Asian, do you understand what I mean? People that are from Asia. Right? So it can be Japan, Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, okay? And they asked these children, can you call your mom or your dad and tell them, I love you? That's a simple thing, right? Call your mom out of the blue and tell your mom, I love you. And the reaction was taken, was videoed. And you know what the reaction was? One Chinese guy called his mom and said, Mom, I just called to tell you that I love you. The mom said, son, are you okay? Is there anything happening there? And another woman from Korea, again, called her mom and say, Mom, we have not talked for a long time, but I just called to say, I love you. Similar reaction. And initially, the mom couldn't say anything. She said, what's wrong? Something happened? Something that I need to know? Why is that? Yeah, because in Asian culture, the way that people express their love is not through saying, I love you, but through actions, right? But if you go to the Americas, to the West, it's a common thing. They meet in the morning, say, I love you. They meet in the afternoon, they say, I love you. Before sleeping, they say, I love you. So what's the point of this? We have different cultures. So one culture values autonomy and independence and has high virtues, right? Age is not associated with wisdom and respect. It doesn't mean that when you are older that you are wiser in this culture. As parents age, there is an expectation they will move to retirement or nursing facilities. So in this culture, the main priority of parents is to raise their child to be independent. And when they are already independent, the parents' expectation is very limited. They're not even expecting the children to visit them many times, probably on special occasions, to get phone calls from time to time. But there's no expectation that your children will take care of you. But instead, these parents will diligently save for their future, for their retirement. And if there's any shame in this culture, that is attached to parents who have not diligently saved when they are old. Can you recognize what this culture is? Right? Now, what is the other culture? The other culture values honor and respect as high virtues. Associate age with wisdom and authority, and youth with folly. And in this culture, you will usually have words associated with respecting people of older age. Like in our country, we call older women ate or tita, right? Or younger brother kuya, right? So this shows that people with older age, you respect them. In this culture, it is expected that as his parents age, he will welcome them into his home. I remember when I was in Fukushima for 1 year, I was working with the locals there. And I have a workmate. He's a very talented engineer. And I asked him, don't you have any plans to go to the city? To go to Tokyo, for example. You have more opportunities there because of your talent. And then he explained to me, I am the oldest son. And it is expected of me that when my parents grow old, that I will take care of them. That they will be in my house together with my family until they die. So this culture is expecting that when your parents age, he will come them into his home. And to put his parents in retirement or nursing facility will bring great shame. Because it is expected that as child of these parents, you will take care of them. Putting them in a nursing facility just shows that you are cold, that you don't care about them. So you can see, an honor in one culture is a shame in another culture. Just imagine a guy from North America talking to his friend saying, my parents are grown old now. They raised me as independent individual, and they are now in a nursing facility. And then people who are from that culture would say, bravo, you have done a great thing, you have prepared well, and now they will be in a place where there will be people on the same stages of life, and they will be taken care of by professionals. Isn't it a good thing? Right? But just imagine a Filipino guy telling to his friends, you know, my parents are old now, so I put them in the nursing facility. What would my friends tell me? Did you have a fight with your parents? Did you hate them so much that you would allow them to grow old among people that they don't know, and people that will take care of them don't even know them? Can you see? If I am sitting there with my Ghanaian friend, Richard, and or my Australian friend, Gerard, and tell them this is how I honor my parents, should I expect them to honor their parents the same way that I'm honoring my parents? No, right? But what is the point? Why I am telling you these two kinds of culture? Because we have to honor our parents that is sensible, practical to our culture, but at the same time, we are still in line with what the Scripture is telling us. We should not accept what our culture is telling us because that's where we grow up, or because that is what the society is telling us. Because our culture may be telling us something that is against the Scripture, right? But we have to be sensitive enough that when we talk to our brothers and sisters and heard them saying, oh, my parents are this in here, and you think of them, this person is not honoring their parents. So we have these two culture, and I don't know if it's just by accident that culture, the blue culture, you tend to see it from the countries that are westernized on the Western Hemisphere. And the other culture here, you will see it the rest of the world. I'm sure the Philippines is like that. Japan probably, if you go to the Inaka, to the provinces, you would see this. But now it's kind of a mixture. I'm kind of a mixture. When I grew up, I was red. And then when I started working with people from the West, I started thinking about the left. And then when I go to the Philippines, and I remember one time at the airport, right? I was about to go back to Japan. My mom came with us at the airport. And you know how it is in the airport, right? When you're about to leave, they will hug you and will kiss you. And then my mom, she was standing next to me, and she was not sure what to do. And I was also not sure what to do. I said, are we supposed to hug? Are we supposed to kiss, right? And I just realized then that I am in the mixture of this culture. And sometimes I tell my wife, when our children grow up, you should not expect them to take care of you. We should save for ourselves so that we don't disturb them, burden them, right? But thinking about it, the Bible is telling us that we should take care of our immediate family, especially our parents. So, does that mean that I should obey the culture? I should balance it out with what the Scripture is telling me. Now, this is where I want to end part one of this sermon. But I want to end it in a happy note, right? This commandment is promising us at least two blessings. What are those blessings? A good life and a long life. But there is a third blessing to this. You will find it in Colossians chapter 3, verse 20. Colossians chapter 3, verse 20 says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." Can you recognize the third blessing there? When you obey this commandment, you will please the Lord. And who among you doesn't want to please the Lord? We honor God by honoring our parents. We honor God by saying, "Mom, Dad, you are the person that God gave to me. And I should honor you because I want to honor God." So at the end, this is why we should obey this commandment. Because we want to please the Lord, because we want to honor God by honoring our parents. I hope you will be back next week, because next week we'll talk about the practical ways of doing this and the exceptions. If you are still talking about the exceptions, that is what we're going to talk about next week.
For our closing song,